Hi folks, welcome to Scholar Tarot. Just call me Mayfield, and thanks a ton for stopping by the study space. Today I wanted to share with you all of my modded decks so far. A modified deck is a deck that's been altered from how it was originally published. Folks will modify decks for different reasons, but the general reason is for the sake of bonding with the deck and personalizing the deck for your own experience. I will say right here, right now, that yes, all of the materials I use are generally recommendations from the channel Boho Tarot, because of course they are. I get a sneaking suspicion a good chunk of people who might come by this channel have also seen videos from Boho Tarot as well. At any rate, for my collection, we'll first take a look at decks that have only been edged, then decks that have been trimmed only, decks that I've edged and trimmed, and finally my failed deck mods. I mean, you gotta start somewhere, right? So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. So my edged only decks are actually limited, to two limited edition decks and a regular deck. So the regular deck is Life is Like a Board Game Tarot by Crystal Banner, and this deck is just purely based off of Monopoly squares, and it's such an easy reader. As you can see here, there are nothing but keywords, to be honest, and that is my jam for whenever I want a lazy reader. There are some really fun images for the major arcana. I think my favorite one is probably going to be the Hanged Man, because it's the chance question mark upside down. But as we're going through this deck, you'll notice that every minor arcana and court card has their own keywords attached to it. And here's the Hanged Man. So this one is, I edged it in a Tombow marker. Looks like this, and it is the 291 Tombow marker. And now it resembles a Monopoly square color. It actually took me quite an inner struggle to figure out which color I wanted, whether it was this one or another one that looked almost identical to it. But I'm really glad I ended up with this one that's like a little bit darker, because I think it came out really excellent. This marker was actually really easy to use, and it turned out better than expected. This is the Ritual Abuse Tarot. It did not come in this bag. It comes in like a white tuck box when you order it on Printer Studios from the artist's website. Artist, by the way, is named Ryan Sheffield. These are the backs. And I edged this deck in a black Sharpie. It was one of the first decks that I ever edged, and it's also one of my first indie decks I ever purchased all the way back in, oh boy, I want to say maybe 2017, 2018. This deck is based off of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, those illustrations that are often really unsettling for children. It's a really cool reader, and I only say that because I use the living crap out of this deck, and I still do use it on occasion. So the edges were kind of starting to get a little bit worn, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna try this whole edging situation. So I went ahead and took a Sharpie to it. It took me maybe about, I don't know, almost 3 hours while I was watching something on YouTube, and it turned out really excellently. I feel like it's pretty much brand spanking new, and I got like a new appreciation for it. So this was the very first one that I edged, and probably one of the few indie decks that I edged as well. Now for the two limited edition tarot decks, I actually wanted to give you a quick word on mass-marketed limited editions. Based on the 2 times I've purchased a Lo Scarabeo limited edition deck, they kind of fell flat on the final product. The art from the decks themselves is completely fantastic, but what you get for a significant price difference is a little underwhelming. I decided to take matters into my own hands. So for the first one that I'm going to show you is the Tarot Z limited edition. That's the back. Tarot Z limited edition. This edition only has a numbered box, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool and it's really neat to look at, but I mean, knowing that, I figured I could replace this with a standard deck, and you know, no one will ever know. Anyways, I decided to edge this deck with an ink pad. And as you can see, it turned out pretty fantastic. After a failed mod that I'll talk about a little bit later, I invested in some mini distress ink stamps. I used black charcoal for this one, and yeah, it came out perfectly. It's an excellent result that I needed as a test for the next deck I wanted to mod. This is the limited edition Murder of Crows Tarot, also from Lo Scarabeo. It was definitely closer to what Lo Scarabeo should be doing for limited edition decks. The difference between a standard Murder of Crows deck and the limited edition is that this one is larger. It contains 2 extra cards that I'll show you right now with significators on it. And instead of black and white like the standard edition is, this one is black, white, and red, which is like one of my favorite color schemes. And I just wanted to take a moment to show you the significators. There are 4 of them, front and back, on 2 extra cards. But a little bit of a backstory. In any official promotional material you'll see of this deck, they advertise this deck with red gilding. Many folks were disappointed to receive their decks and find out that the gilding was not there. Shortly after Barnes & Noble canceled my pre-order, presumably due to the scarcity of this item, I searched the interwebs for reviews of this deck, and I did find an unboxing video by Delora Dabbles. So as I wondered how the flip someone got their hands on this deck, Delora simply mentioned that she would edge the deck herself. I should also mention at this point, I had never modded a deck before. This would actually be the first time I ever considered such a thing. At any rate, I scored a copy from this indie bookstore in Canada and mulled over how I wanted to edge this. Because if I mess this up, it's over. This deck is now out of print and no longer available, so I needed to be smart about this. Insert the aforementioned Tarot Z, which I etched in black with the Distress ink pad. It came out wonderfully, and since these 2 decks shared the same card stock, I felt really good about it. The new problem was figuring out a color. My local Michael's hobby shop only had the Distress ink pad for candied apples, so I did settle for that, knowing that I could just color over it with a fire truck red if the former was like too light. So if you have this deck, or if you have like the standard edition and you want to edge it in red, Candy Apple is what I used for this. If you want it a little bit darker, perhaps consider the fire truck red. But I did not use a Sharpie for a reason that I will get into a little bit later. But yes, this is the Murder of Crows Tarot limited edition. If you are interested in this deck, there is the standard edition still available that's in black and white, and it's still a really cool artwork. Highly recommend. The next category is trimmed only decks. So these are decks that I have not edged and only chopped the borders off. There's actually only one deck in this category, and it's the Tarot of the Sweet Twilight. Now, this older Lo Scarabeo deck had the famous or infamous 4-language border, and it got on my nerves. This is the type of surreal imagery that you would want freed from its borders, so that's precisely what I did. It's this nice pocket size now, but I am struggling on what color to edge it and how to edge it. I haven't quite decided if I wanted to do like a marker. I feel like it would probably bleed with this type of cardstock. Oh, and take a look at the backs too. I feel really proud of myself that I was able to have the backs still look really cool. But the colors that I was thinking was either Lucky Clover Distress ink. And yeah, it is largely because I'm hoping that it would match the backs, or the Carved Pumpkin Or if it's like neither and I should edge it in a completely different color. Somebody tell me what to do. In all honesty, definitely let me know what you think in the comments as to what I should edge this deck in, because I do want to edge it. I'm just unsure of what color that I would want to use for this particular deck, since it is already really very colorful. And like, now that there's no border, there's really no reason for me to match that. And just for reference, I'll go ahead and show you what it used to look like. So this was the regular borders, and it would have the 4 languages, 4 or 5 or 6 languages on the card. So now it's like significantly tiny. But yes, Tarot of the Sweet Twilight is the only deck that I still have yet to edge. For my trimmed and edged decks, these are the decks that I did the whole 9 yards, where I, chopped off the borders and I gave them some sort of pretty color attached to it. I did them for various reasons, but I'll go ahead and share with you the first one, and that's going to be the Crow Tarot by MJ McCullinane. And I really do like the art for this deck, but the borders made it way too big for my hands, and I craved to place a deck on the chopping block. So this deck was the first mod I ever did where I included the washi tape to hold down a roller, so it didn't slip and slide everywhere, but it was still a bit of a challenge. Quite a few cards. I mean, as you can see, I do have a little bit of some casualties, because many of the cards do have either long titles or the cut was a little bit too close. Like this one is a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. This time I was still using Sharpies. This one is done in a metallic bronze. And on camera it looks like more of a brown. But I mean, when I'm seeing it, I could definitely see, like, yeah, that's a Sharpie and it looks like a penny. In all, I'm really pleased with the results, which is why I don't consider it a failed mod, because the Sharpie is fading a little bit. I mean, which wouldn't necessarily make it a failure, so to speak. But I'm really very happy with how this turned out, and I still use this deck pretty regularly. The Tattoo Tarot, Ink and Intuition. This one came out perfectly, in my humble opinion. I trimmed and edged this deck just because I could, not necessarily because I felt the need to. The backs were a little bit difficult to reckon with, but it's elaborate enough for me to not notice. Again, I was still using Sharpies at the time, so this one was done in a red Sharpie, and you can see how bold it looks. It did bleed just a little bit, which actually prompted me to put off edging the Murder of Crows for a little while. But yes, this was also kind of a test for the Murder of Crows. But I think it turned out really excellently. As with, I don't think I mentioned this for the Crow Tarot, but I can't like riffle shuffle that one very well. I can't riffle shuffle this one either, but I prefer to hand over hand for these decks specifically, just because the way they feel is really nice. But now that they're these tiny sizes, it's just so much fun to be able to lay down the cards and, look at that red border that bled through. Which it looks like it's picking up on camera, but this was just a lot of fun to do. And I think that this deck would be like a great practice deck for anybody who's interested in starting out with mods, because I don't think this deck is like all that expensive. Let me see. List price. Yeah, list price is like $18 for US dollars. So yeah, definitely, this was definitely a win for me. Next one is the Mother Mary Oracle. As you've probably guessed at this point, I'm not a big fan of Oracle-sized decks. So for this one, I did chop off the borders and I edged it in what's supposed to be gold. So I used a different, let me actually grab it really quick. For this deck, I used this right here. You can see my Pac-Man shirt, enjoy. This is a Recollections brand archival pigment ink pad, and it's gold. This brand, man. Okay, so it took 7 centuries for it to dry. My cut wasn't fantastic, but I do think that it turned out okay. At first, I tried a metallic gold Sharpie, and then I didn't really like the way that it looked, so I tried an ink stamp for the first time, and it looked okay. Like, I think it has this really cool aesthetic. Like, if you were to walk into a church for whatever reason you would go into a church for, you would see just a lot of antique gold, and I think it matches the aesthetic for this deck. And this was around the time that I also was a little, not lazy, but I kind of underestimated how much you needed to have like a paper towel or something on hand so you can wipe the excess away. If you can see, whoops. Yes, if you can see it a little bit, you can see there are traces of the gold ink pad a little bit. I'm not too mad at it for this deck because I think it matches that aesthetic, but that is something to keep in mind if you were to, you know, do what I did and use this for whatever reason you would use this for. But yeah, otherwise I do think it came out all right. Not too mad at it. Now, before I get to my failed modified decks, I would like to offer an honorable mention. It's Tarot of a Moon Garden. This deck has since moved on from my collection, but I do have a link to my Instagram if you want to check out the before and after. I got the deck because it looked whimsical and chill, but damn it, I opened the box and thought, ugh, it's hideous. I get that art is subjective, of course, so I apologize if this is like your favorite deck, but I think the most unforgivable aspect of that deck was the border on the borders. I'm certain something went wrong in the proofing stage, and you can't change my mind about that. But at any rate, I chopped the white borders off and edged it in a blue Sharpie. It looked significantly better, but not good enough for me to keep in my collection. So it's now in a happy home where it deserves. I only mention it because Tarot of a Moon Garden walked so the rest of these could run. Other earlier attempts, however, on this channel, I would really like to normalize mistakes, so I'd like to take a moment to appreciate my failed modified decks. My first oopsie was the Tarot de Marseille. These are what the backs look like. I was like obsessed with the backs, and I'll show you what a regular copy looks like right now. But when I purchased this deck, I was pretty new to the world of buying on eBay, and I bought it for a decent price, but the description failed to mention that the previous owner wrote all over the borders in pen. So clearly this was a study deck for someone who wanted to translate French titles into English. This was the first deck I ever modded, and it was done so out of necessity. Now, part of the problem was that the borders didn't perfectly align to some of the images, and I think that might actually be a good time to show you what the original one looked like. So this is what a regular copy looks like. And there's the backs. And so sometimes the borders like are a little wonky, but I mean this was a pretty good practice deck to be able to trim. I'm just glad I got a backup shortly afterwards. By the way, in case you're interested, I think this deck is just called the Tarot deck, and it comes in like a light blue box, or it comes in like a pack where it comes with like this book here, where it comes with this book. But you're probably wondering at this point, like, what's up with it? Well, my biggest wrong move was the corner rounder I had at the time. Oh, my strength card. It hurts. The second oopsie was the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack. As mentioned before on this channel, I used to work at Barnes & Noble, and that afforded me like a pretty sweet store discount, prompting me to like go on mini shopping sprees for mass market decks every once in a while. So pretty early on in my collection days, and see here's what the, okay, so that was a test, I promise. But so pretty early on my collecting days, I naively assumed that the oldest published deck is inherently a better deck, which is not entirely true. When I shopped on the BN website, I searched up Rider-Waite Tarot and sorted by oldest, and I bought this copy, and unfortunately it was unusable for me because the cards were completely uneven, and it wasn't even at my own doing, which is mildly what upset me. So I couldn't riffle shuffle them, and I just didn't want to really use them. I decided to mod it for practice, since now I understand that other perfectly fine iterations of the RWS deck are always available. I think this was the first time I ever played around with measurements in my modding practice, although I still have yet to round the corners, just because I feel weird about having purchased this deck to begin with. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll continue the corner rounding process, and I'll see if this is a deck that I'm even interested in still keeping in my collection. Finally, these are the Philosophy cards by Melanie Maschio. It is a beautiful existentialist tarot. Existentialist philosophy is my jam. This was my first attempt at actually using a stamp, and it was, dun dun dun, the Recollections brand silver stamp. Yeah, it was not a good is really what I would probably say about that. So it was way too wet, and it took approximately like 3 months to dry, and even then, like, sometimes the glitter might come off. I mean, I think I spent a decent amount of time trying to like rub it off, to be honest, because I wanted a do-over. I wanted to do it all over again. I did try to coat it with like a purple distress ink, which you might be able to see. Let me just do this real quick. So like, you can see some of the cards, and you can totally tell that I kind of gave up, not even in the middle. Like, I was an eighth of the way there, and I'm like, oh, screw this noise. Because the purple distress ink is just not showing well. My next dumb move will be to try an oil-based paint Sharpie, because I have nothing left to lose. I want so badly for the card backs, as wonderful as they are, I want the card backs to not be so prominent on the edges. That wasn't my intention before, but now it's personal. And that was everything thus far. It's been a hot second since I've modded any decks. I've considered modding the Threadbound Oracle and the Numinous Oracle, both by Cedar McLeod. However, I just need a moment to figure out what colors I wanted to edge those decks. And I mean, I'm just not totally sure. It's one of those, you know, if I mess up, it's kind of over. But I mean, it's still available, but you know, it would not be cheap to replace it. It's very rare that I ever mod an indie deck. I think the only indie decks that you saw that I modded was the Philosophy cards, which was a mild disaster, but I do think it's fixable. Life is Like a Board Game by Crystal Banner, and the Ritual Abuse Tarot by Ryan Sheffield. So those are the only ones that were independent that I modded, but we'll see what I decide to do next time. So thank you for joining me today at the study space. Definitely be sure to make discourse not war in the comments, and I will catch you guys later.